Hi everyone, Robert here with Mod Science, Facebook Mod Science, modscience.net. Check out the site if you haven't already done so, lots of useful information on there. And today I will be showing you a brief video about my Fury build. I have a RAF build, which is my Ryzen 7 1700X. This here is Fury, a Ryzen 5 1600 installed into a Corsair 570X tempered glass PC case, of course. And then I have a EKWB Aorus Gaming K7 motherboard, and this is an EK custom loop, EK PETG, EK angled fittings, reservoir pump, all that stuff. The compression tube fittings themselves are actually Alpha Cool, but everything else that you're seeing here is all EK equipment, with maybe a few bits of random, brackets and Alpha Cool's reservoir holder. Reservoir bracket installed. So, again, use whatever parts work. I primarily use EK parts, but, at the end of the day, so long as everything looks good and works for you, then really doesn't matter. Today, that is also the EK AX370 gaming monoblock made specifically for the Gaming K7, Gaming K5, and the Gaming 5 EKWB Aorus line of boards. Great monoblock, very high quality build. I haven't really tested temperatures on it, but it looks great. And you will notice that there is already some coolant inside of it. So I did fill up the loop, and then I had an issue with one of my bends that I wasn't very happy with. So I just redid the bend, reinstalled everything, and just wanted to kind of show you one of the more fun parts of actually completing your loop here. So a few tips, and I'm speaking from experience, and learn from my mistakes here. Take your time with your bends. Make sure that you have plenty of extra PETG tubing, because mistakes happen. And some of them are irreversible. So it's always comforting to know that you have another piece of PETG just laying around. So what I usually make sure I do before I fill the loop. I make sure that I don't obviously you want to make sure all your angles look good to you. Okay, I've done a little bit tinkering. Everything looks good to me angle-wise. And then, of course, you want to make sure all your fittings and your PETG are secured to the equipment itself. You also want to make sure that you have sealed off any ports or anything like that, just to make sure that you don't have any sort of leaks. Now, technically, you could lay a bunch of paper towel in here as you're filling the loop, but I didn't want to do that. I've already made sure that this thing won't leak, and I'm pretty damn confident that it won't. So I just wanted to kind of show you the filling itself. So I have a PSU unit, which I'm not sure if you can see here. It's a Cooler Master PSU hooked up. It's actually not the one that's installed in the case. This is just an extra one I have laying around, but you could use the one that you already have. This is what's called a bridging plug, I think. So what it does is that it routes the power out of the PSU, and then allows you to power on your pump without having the motherboard hooked up. It just reroutes the signal, I guess, back to it, to fool the PSU into thinking that you have a motherboard hooked up. So you also want to make sure that the only component hooked up to your PSU is your pump, okay? And you just hook it up with your Molex connector or whatever connector that you have. You don't even bother to hook it up to the motherboard itself. Nothing else is hooked up to this entire system. The reason being is because, if you have a leak or anything like that as you're stress testing, you want to make sure that nothing drips onto anything that could cause any sort of electrical issues. So hook up the Molex connector or hook up your pump to your PSU. Do not power on the PSU because if you run your pump while it's dry, it's not good at all. But you would just use the switch on the back of your PSU to essentially turn on and turn off your pump. Okay. I have a funnel hooked up to the top of my reservoir here, and I'm just going to fill it through the fill port at the top. I have a bottle of coolant, which is EK's Pastel Red Coolant. It's a great coolant. I've used it quite a few times in this build. I wanted to actually use like a completely fresh batch. I wanted to get you like footage of the loop completely emptied, but I had to make a fix to one of the bends. So I have filtered this numerous times through coffee filters, which I read online is a pretty good way to do it. The entire system has been blitzed. We're using the Mayhems Blitz kit. I have video footage of, kind of getting an overview of how that kit works. The radiator has been blitzed of all decontaminants. The entire system has been flushed as well a few times. So what I'll be doing now is just filling this up. So let's get started here. You just take your coolant, and then you want to just open up your reservoir, pop your funnel into it, and then carefully pour some of the fluid into the loop itself here. Okay. What I usually do is fill up the reservoir to a certain amount, and then you simply power on. And you want to stop the, you want to turn off your PSU right before your pump gets nearly empty, okay? So what you're wanting to do is just slowly pump fluid into, coolant into the rest of the loop itself here. And then, as soon, my reservoir is hooked up by a tube right here and some angled fittings in the back. So I usually will stop it by the time the reservoir gets a little bit empty. Okay, so you just want to make sure that you do that. And then you simply take more of your coolant, carefully pour it in to your reservoir. Like so. And then you would just power on your loop again, or power on your PSU. And watch that coolant flow through your wonderful loop. Oh, and look how it fills up that monoblock just nicely there. I really like how that monoblock looks. And you have like an unboxing footage, and you also have kind of an overview of how to install on my channel too, if you want to refer to it, and you should have already viewed that already. Okay. Just fill up your coolant, and you want to just make sure you kind of keep an eye out for any sort of leaks or potential issues. Power on your PSU, let it flow, and okay. So once nothing really empties out of the reservoir, that means that you've pretty much completed the entire loop here. Now there will be air bubbles. You'll see a lot of that foam right there in the reservoir. A lot of that stuff will actually eventually go away the longer you just let the pump and the system run. So you want to just make sure that you fill up the entire thing and let it run for a bit. I'm just going to kind of let it run here just for a second as I kind of talk you through the rest of this. So the how my loop is set up, so I've got my reservoir feeding into my pump, and you always want to make sure that the reservoir is above it feeds into your pump itself here. There's like a couple of angled fittings back there, a little 90-degree bend feeding into the top of the pump. Out of the pump, it feeds into the reservoir into a 4-port EK fitting. And I've used this as a drain port. It's actually pretty effective. I use this one, and I use the top of the reservoir in combination with one another to drain the loop. Takes a little bit of time, but it was really the only way I could really make this work. EK's reservoirs have both fittings at the top, and I really didn't want to have to put the fittings at the bottom here. But anyway, I usually just have to invert the entire thing and drain the loop there itself there. It feeds into the radiator. I've got a few plug fittings here just to make sure nothing leaks everywhere. And then out of the radiator into the inlet pump where the jet, wherever the jet is. Okay, this is the import. You always want to make sure that on these monoblocks that the inlet is always the one with the jet. Okay, I've made that mistake on one of my earlier builds. I plugged in the inlet port into the wrong port, and it still flows through the entire thing, but anytime you actually power on the machine, it's not going to effectively cool your CPU because it's not taking the coolest water and then not feeding right into the CPU to where the CPU is. So and then of course most of these jets are designed for water to flow through a certain way. It still flows inversely, but you just want to avoid that altogether. So again, just remember that you feed the input into the inlet into where the jet is. And then from the monoblock, it cools the VRMs and the MOSFETs. This is where it keeps the CPU cool from here. And then out of the monoblock, it feeds back right on into the reservoir, and then it just repeats itself the entire way. And that's pretty much your entire custom loop. Really, filling this entire thing up is probably one of the best parts of building this. I mean, bending the tubing, making sure everything looks right is such a tedious chore. Takes some time, requires a lot of patience. You will make mistakes, believe me. You will get extremely discouraged. But, at the end of the day, just this is the reason why you do it. It just looks so great. Obviously, you're probably focused on the temperatures and all that kind of stuff, but really and truly, you can get temps with frickin', some pretty high quality regular coolant, like air-cooled equipment. But we all know that the reason why we do this is for the aesthetic appeal too. At least that's why I do it, because it looks frickin' cool. So I'm going to go ahead and just fill up the reservoir a little bit more. Okay, I usually like to fill it up maybe 3/4 of the way for now, and then I'll let this run for quite a bit. Just to make sure. I'll probably run it overnight to let it to stress test it, although I'm very confident that everything is fine, but you can never be too careful. Yeah, and then later on what I'll do is once some of the air bubbles have filtered out of the reservoir, I'll actually fill it up to where it looks like this entire reservoir is filled up. There'll be a little bit of space at the top there. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Some of these angles, I made these bends, or well, at least these two tubing bends with Primochill's rigid bender kit. It's like a bending jig. Let me go ahead and show you that here. Pretty useful tool and highly worth the investment. It's a little confusing to use at first, but once you kind of get accustomed to how it works, I mean, it's almost invaluable whenever it comes to bending your tubing. Obviously, if you guys are pretty good at bending things by hand, that's certainly okay, but I don't know, you get that precision and clean bends with a tool and a jig, and in my opinion, it just gives it a much more professional and clean look to it all. So yeah, and then sometimes sometimes air will kind of get deposited in certain parts of the loop, so technically you would want to tilt your machine. You don't want to invert it because you don't want the pump to run invert. You never want that to happen. But you would just slightly tilt it, front, back, side to side, just to make sure that any air that's trapped in any other parts of the loop kind of just drain through and kind of air pass through the system there. But yeah, you just let this run, and eventually you can just hook up all your equipment back into it. Always make sure that you decontaminate and clean out your radiator blocks. Or your radiators, because on a previous build I had some issues with some buildup here in the jet. But if you use the Mayhem kit that I used, or if you just make sure that you flush out your radiator just a lot, then it'll help ensure that there's no buildup in certain parts of this and give it an overall clean look. Okay. But anyway, that's pretty much it. I'm going to let this run. You'll get more photos and video of this final build. I got a lot of, this thing actually lights up with RGB lighting. I actually have an RGB light strip down here. Oh, for those people who have this monoblock, there's actually, for this motherboard, there actually is another RGB connection right underneath where the motherboard is covered, where the monoblock covers it. So keep that in mind before you install the monoblock. If you want to install other RGB lighting onto this board without having to require a splitter, plug it into the RGB port right underneath there. Okay. But anyway, I'll be plugging the RAM back in. I've got some G-Skill Trident Z RGB RAM, 16 gigabytes of that. I don't necessarily have a GPU yet. I have the Radeon Vega Frontier Edition, which is also, I've put an unboxing video online, and that one is installed into my Wrath build. I'll probably switch those two, put that Frontier Edition into this guy, and put the new RX Vega GPU into the Wrath build. And you can guarantee that both of those are going to have a GPU block, and it will be custom looped into this entire thing as well. Okay. But anyway, thanks again for checking the video. I really do appreciate you taking the time here. If you would, go ahead and like this video. Go ahead and put comments in the section below, any questions or anything like that. Check me out on Facebook Mod Science. Also, I have a website set up where I post a lot of these videos, pictures. I'll post articles, just anything related to liquid cooling and enthusiast PC hardware. There on the site, so you can check them out too. Modscience.net, Facebook Mod Science. I hope you enjoyed this brief video. And doesn't it look cool? I sure as hell think so. It's a lot of hard work, people, but it is absolutely worth it in the end. Expensive stuff, time consuming, requires a tremendous amount of patience, but it's art and it's beautiful and a hell of a lot of fun. So anyway, thanks again for checking the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and thank you.